Welcome back. If you're just joining us, this is still the Moneyline with Nancy, reaching you live from Africa Independent Television, AIT. Our guest has joined us now. He is Rislanuddin Mohammed. He's a former managing director with Unity Bank, Nigeria. Welcome to the program, sir.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me.
Okay, so sir, we've seen inflation dropping for the 8th consecutive time this year to 16.01 in August, we saw last month, to 15.98% in this September. What could you attribute? How would you react to this report?
Okay, thank you very much. If you noticed, the inflation trend has been that the headline inflation, because there are different forms of inflation index. The headline inflation has been coming down for the 8th consecutive months, from the peak of about 18.27% thereabout to 15.98% as released by the data released by the National Bureau of Statistics yesterday. I think the answer is very clear. We are lucky from middle of last year or thereabout. We had 3 advantages. Nigerian economy had 3 advantages. Advantage number 1, oil price started going up. Meanwhile, you should note that we remain an import-dependent economy.
Yes.
We rely largely on oil for foreign exchange earnings, for our major revenue. So oil price went up, output went up. Output went up because there was relative peace in the Niger Delta. And the third advantage is that because at some point we are exporting less than 1 million barrels, even though OPEC allow us to export up to 2.2 million barrels, but we could not do it because of the activities of the Niger Delta. Even when price started going up, some other members of OPEC were benefiting, but we are not benefiting because of the same problem that we have had with the Niger Delta issue. So when OPEC sat down trying to do what's called, price correction measure, they look at our situation and became sympathetic to Nigeria. Because in doing the price correction, they try to bring down the output so that they can jack up the price for all members. In fact, they included other non-OPEC members like Russia, so that the objective will be optimally achieved. And the objective was achieved. But they look at Nigeria and Libya and sympathize with all that. Even when price was going up, we were not benefiting. So they excluded us. They gave us the quota waiver. That quota waiver enabled us to export as much as we could, up to the maximum of 2.2 million barrels, which is near what we are now. So output went up, price went up, revenue increased, foreign exchange earnings increased, which gave the central bank the capacity to meet up with legitimate needs, which sent away most of the pressure that was in the black market back to the several windows that the central bank opened, the NIFEX and so on. So the so-called cost push inflation came down. So imported inflation came down. And because of also stability in the petroleum sector, which is also a major aspect of the headline index, rather the headline inflation, it has also stabilized. So we had stability as far as the headline inflation is concerned. But if you notice, the core inflation, which isolate some subsectors that are susceptible to shocks that go up and down, like price of food, like food items, like oil and gas. It has specifically food inflation has not come down. It might not have come down because the impact may not be immediate. The impact of reduction in other cost inputs of production might not be immediate. But over time, the food index will also come down.
So, but experts, according to the report from MBS, they've attributed this marginal decline to the widespread of ease in food prices. But on the contrary, we are seeing food prices going the highest this year to 20.32%.
Yes.
So how does this relate? Ease in food prices and the increase in food prices in the market?
The point I'm making is it went to the rooftop. Think about the price of a bag of rice a year ago, for example, and think about its price now. It's coming down, but it has not come down to the level in which the impact of the reduction will be felt. It has been coming down, and it will continue to come down because other inputs, other cost of doing the business, other cost of producing the rice has gone down. If you have a large, you are doing agri-business, you have a large factory, you are importing machineries, the cost of importing those machineries have come down because you can be able to access foreign exchange now through the official rate rather than through the black market. Even if you are accessing the foreign exchange through the black market rate has come down drastically from about 520 to 360. The point I'm making is the impact might not be immediate. You can have an immediate impact, for example, on cost of diesel. You understand? It's also one of those factors, inflation index that is typically isolated because of the, because of the shocks that can happen to it. But if it comes down, you can see the immediate impact. As far as food items is concerned, the impact may be gradual, but we will begin to, so long as this stability is sustained, so long as CBN continues to have the capacity to meet up with the import needs, so long as we also take advantage of this situation and begin to implement, for example, the programs and policies put in place by the Economic Recovery and Growth Plan, specifically issues relating to export income diversification, general economic diversification away from oil. But if we remain this way, and if we get into another shock of oil price, then we go back to square zero.
All right, so let me come in here now. You mentioned that we would see the food prices continue to come down. But don't you think that with we are about to enter one of the most busiest seasons, the festive season now in Nigeria? Do you think don't you think there's a danger in that, considering the fact that even transportation costs will go up? Don't you think that we are still going to see the food inflation, to be particular, still go up?
Yeah, you see, you get into a problem one-off, but you don't get out of it overnight. That is why before the economy went into recession, there were a lot of suggestions as to how we should not allow the economy to get into recession, even though there were clearly myriad of challenges that the economy was facing. We should not allow it. If it gets in, to get out, it will be a gradual process. Yes, you are right. The cost of transportation might go up ahead of the festive season. The cost of food item. Why? Because the demand might be higher. And it is always easier to address challenges of a cost push inflation than a demand pull inflation. If we have demand pull inflation, somebody will begin to, somehow feel that, yes, okay, now it is like we are getting out of recession because the Nigerians now have the capacity to buy.
Yes.
Because in most instances, when you get into recession, you only look at the basic needs. So the price might be going up. There may be some demand pull inflation ahead of the festive season, but it may not be very significant to the extent of, distorting the trajectory of recovery that we are getting into.
Okay, so on Tuesday, that's 17th of October, the world celebrated the International Day for Eradication of Poverty, and one of the focus of the IMF and World Bank meeting was investing in human capital, which is a way to eradicate poverty. Now, do you think, what's the relationship between high inflation in Nigeria and the high rates of poverty, and how do we curb inflation in order to curb the rate of poverty in Nigeria?
If you are talking of poverty eradication, is an all-encompassing issue, you look at the vagaries of Human Development Index.
Yeah.
What is the level of health services that we have? What is the level of education that we have? What is the level of infrastructure that we have? And what capacity do we have, to change the negative trajectory? Investing in human capital is the best form of developing a society. Basically, education. If you educate a society, the development will be automatic, because once you are educated, you are typically liberated. But if you are not educated, you face myriads of challenges. So the challenge of Nigerian government today is all about, like the IMF World Bank was saying, it's all about developing the human capital. Getting the negative trajectory of Human Development Index, reversed. About 10 years ago, the United Nations launched the MDG, Millennium Development Goals. All indicators clearly show that we have not achieved, and we have transited to sustainable development. The whole idea was from millennium to you get into sustainable. That means but we are still doing the sustainable. We have gotten into sustainable development goals, but I don't think we have achieved all that is required in terms of Human Development Index on that we set. The United Nations and Nigerian government also set for itself 10 years ago, as far as the Millennium Development Goals are concerned.
Okay, for inflation figures now, we are seeing them coming. We see inflation figures coming down gradually, and like I said earlier on, that there's a big relationship between inflation and poverty rate, because when prices of things are expensive in the market, fewer people can buy things, and the cycle just continues like that. How do you see inflation figures in the next few months, and how do you feel Nigeria? Do you think Nigerians will be able to cope if inflation figures trend higher, especially if money supply is put on hold from the central bank?
No society survives with a terrible inflation situation. At the same time, no society survives with a deflation situation, because deflation discourages growth.
Yes.
So there is no society that supports that. Earlier on, I told you that major cause of inflation in Nigeria is essentially not a demand pull inflation. It's essentially cost push inflation, largely driven by the fact that we are an import-dependent economy, and we rely so much on importing goods from other countries for our daily lives. And if those the cost of importing those goods goes up, automatically the price will be reflected. So the solution, long-term solutions, medium, long-term solution to ensuring that we don't get back to high inflation figures is to diversify the economy. Because if we rely on the fact that now we have the capacity to meet up with the imports, all the import needs, the trend can get reversed, because we can get it into another shock of a cycle of price of oil coming down, or challenges with production, God forbid. So the only solution is to have a sustained diversification of the economy, as encapsulated in the economic recovery and growth plan. We have a beautiful plan, but the only thing now is to get it implemented. Yes.
Okay, let me come in here now. For the past week, we've seen, of course, the world economic outlook was positive. That was predicted was positive. We've seen our external reserves going up. Now we are seeing inflation maintaining the downward trajectory. Is it safe to say that we are getting to the point where we can say it is uhuru for the Nigerian economy? And you mentioned the ARGP. Have we even touched down, scratched the surface yet?
No, it's not. We are not yet. It's not yet uhuru. As an economist, I can say we are out of recession. But as discussing with a Nigerian, it may be difficult to convince an average Nigerian that we are out of recession. I know we are out of recession because the recovery process takes longer period. You get in one-off, but to recover, to get out and to recover takes a longer period of time. So I cannot say we are not. I'm talking about even the AGRP. Last year we had a discussion here I think, on this program, and we're saying was that, yes, it is a beautiful plan, but what we were saying at that time was that at least, because before then, Nigerians were talking about the new government, what is your economic blueprint? When they came up with it, I said, okay, now we have an economic blueprint that we can hold the government accountable to. Follow the plans. It's a 3-year plan.
Yeah.
For example, we are in October now, and the EGRP says,
ERGP.
yes, says gave a growth projection of 2.19% in 2017. Are we there? So the essence of checking is, there is nothing wrong in saying we get 2.19%, but all that is important is, if we are not getting, which is clear, we cannot achieve 2.19%, what went wrong? How do we correct it? We projected 4.5% in 2018 and 7.5 or thereabout percent in 2019. How do we ensure that even if we are not able to meet up with 2.19% in 2017, we can get the 4.5% in 2018 and 7. And if we cannot, what do we do to review the plan so that it can be actionable, it can be realistic?
But how actionable, how feasible is this plan? Considering the fact that elections are just by the corner, and then every politician in the country will start turning their focus to election preparations and all that. Do you think the government still have that political will to ensure that this economic recovery plan is fully implemented before 2020?
It's a very difficult subjective question to say whether there is a political will. Since the plan has been presented and launched by the president, like I said earlier on, what Nigerians need to do now is to hold the government accountable to it. Whether there is election or not, they know there is going to be election in 2019. They know there will be preparation for election in 2018. And a projection was made, a recovery and growth plan, right? To recover out from recession and a growth trajectory. There is a projection of 2.19%. We have not achieved it, but we have made progress by exiting recession. Then, what do we do in the context of the recovery plan to ensure that we achieve 2.19%? And if we cannot achieve the 2.19%, what are the underlying reasons, and how do we correct them? How do we address them? How do we ensure that the projections we have already made in 2018, for example, is going to be achievable? Like 2 weeks ago, I think 2 weeks or 3 weeks ago, the Honorable Minister of Finance and the economic team went to the House of Representatives, and they are saying that one of the major means in which we can achieve that growth projection may not be feasible this year. That is implementation of the capital aspect of the budget. They said only 15% was going to be achieved. And why? Because there were challenges with the borrowings and so on and so forth. The entire capital budget is premised on borrowing. And the borrowing hasn't come, and there was some challenges with balancing the borrowings. The borrowing seemed to be tilted more on local borrowing, crowding out the private sector, and it's expensive, and so on and so forth. So we begin to ask questions that, okay, this is the plan, and you are already saying that you cannot achieve. What are you doing, for example, in 2018 to ensure that those challenges are mitigated, to ensure that whatever you say you were going to achieve, if you are projecting a budget of 30% capital expenditure, you will be able to achieve that 30% capital expenditure, because the main sweetener of capital expenditure is issue of stimulating the economy, which is a whole reason why, the basis on which, an economy can really be pulled out of recession.
Okay, let's see, you've mentioned the issue of borrowing. There has been a lot of the conversation of borrowing, although economists and experts have continued to reiterate the fact that the problem is not that we have a very low debt to GDP ratio, but what we should be looking at is the debt to revenue ratio. What are your thoughts on the conversation around Nigeria's debt stock?
Yes, generally economists will say you have a funding gap, you are in recession, you need to borrow money to pull yourself out of recession, to stimulate the economy, and so on and so forth. But there is a rider. If you look at our debt to GDP ratio is hovering around 20%,
Yes.
which is very neat for a developing economy like us. But the main challenge that we have is the debt to revenue ratio, which is about 60%. So if you are spending an average of about 60 cents of a dollar to service existing debt, and in 2017, in the context of the projected repayment of existing debt, we made a provision of 1.6 trillion
Yes.
out of a budget of 7.3 trillion.
7.44
7.4 trillion.
Yes.
We made a provision of 1.6 trillion to service
Debt.
existing debt. And your revenue projection is not coming to terms with what you want. I think there is a need to review the borrowing plans. Yes, I agree with the in part with the government's position that there is need to rebalance. But even that rebalancing aspect was embedded in the budget, 2017 budget. It was 54%
Yes.
local borrowing, 46%
Foreign.
foreign borrowing, 40 foreign borrowing. Now they are saying is about 80% is local borrowing. And the local borrowing is very expensive. Treasury bills, bond yields about 18%. So anybody, corporates, individuals, will be making money, and the government will be faced with the challenges of paying back the loan. Then going back to the foreign loans, yes, it will be cheap, but it might come with conditionalities.
Yeah.
If it might come with like Eurobond, there may be maybe guarantees with our foreign earnings and so on and so forth. So there is a challenge with implementation of the budget because of paucity of revenue. But there is a challenge in having a very high debt to revenue ratio. What do you do? My suggestion is, rather than focusing on borrowing and borrowing and borrowing, why don't you adopt a different model of creating an atmosphere, conducive atmosphere for investment? Getting direct investment. People can come and invest. We can give them tax holiday. We can give them so many incentives to bring in. If they will need land, we should make land easily accessible to them. If they need an infrastructure in the area where they are going to set up a factory or a plant or whatever, we make it easier for them. I think it will be easier, it will be more economically, viable, to focus more on investment, supporting rather than borrowing to spend the money ourselves, while we are still struggling to get the economy diversified. Up to now, we rely on oil. And if there is no oil, when some few months back, when this problem, a few years, like 2 years, 2.5 years, when the problem was at its peak, up to now, those challenges have not been addressed. Up to now, there are a backlog of salaries of civil servants, there are a backlog of pensions, arrears, and so on and so forth. Why? Because revenue earnings went down, and those states do not have anything, to address those immediate primary challenges of taking care of salaries of workers.
Okay, and you talked about bringing foreign direct investment to Nigeria as opposed to borrowing. Now, the federal government says the essence of this borrowing is to bridge infrastructural gap, and the World Bank has also commended the Nigerian government for that. So are you saying that borrowing should be put away totally when we know definitely that these funds are definitely be channeled towards bridging the infrastructural gap in Nigeria?
No. What I'm saying is there should be some balancing. There should be some balancing. When you are borrowing and your revenue cannot be able to address your repayments, you become a huge data nation. The next thing that the same World Bank and the IMF will begin to tell you is you need a balance of payment support from them. And once you start talking about balance of payment support, then they give you conditionalities. And those conditionalities are typically anti-poor. So while there would be need for some borrowings, especially on issues like infrastructure, roads, and so on, there is still need, to tarry a while, not to overborrow. Areas where we can encourage direct investment, let us not say as a government we will do the investment ourselves. Encourage, whether it is a public-private partnership, whatever, encourage people to bring in their money to invest. You see, this country is about 175 or 180 million people.
No, we are still growing.
Once the atmosphere is conducive, no investor will shy away from coming to Nigeria. Between Nigeria, South Africa, and I think Algeria, we control over 50% of the GDP, gross GDP of Africa. So nobody will shy away from coming to Nigeria once the atmosphere is conducive enough.
Talking about revenue generation now, we know that we've seen the conversation also around tax, and you said that, okay, we should give this foreign investors tax holiday, but for how long? What happens to the local investors if we keep offering these foreign investors tax holidays? Wouldn't that send a wrong signal?
No, it will not. It's an incentive measure in a situation where you don't have the local capital. You understand?
Yeah.
You don't have the local capital, and you need that capital. And somebody is coming in with his own capital. I think there is nothing wrong in, for example, somebody wants to come in and set up a solar power plant, for example, which has a lot of multiplier effect on the industries and on agribusiness, on all aspects of our economy,
yes.
The value chain, reduction in cost of doing business, and so on. I think there is nothing wrong, for example, somebody is coming as an incentive to say, okay, we are giving you land. Okay. What is wrong in that?
Okay, quickly before we go, we have run out of time now. Thank you for joining us today. We are speaking with Rislanuddin Mohammed. He was the managing director of Unity Bank. Thank you so much for joining us. That's the much we can take on the program today. Do you have yourself a lovely day? My name is Christiana Amodu.
And I'm Helena. We'll see you tomorrow.